All right. Okay, we have Alec Hudnut with us today from who is a managing partner with Vici Partners. And what we are going to be talking about is how to increase the profits of your business by 25 to 100%. But before we get going, Alec, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Doug. Yes. I'm 59. I've been working for a long time. I started a long time ago at Goldman Sachs and went to Harvard Business School and then worked at McKinsey consulting firm. And then I started three software companies, one in e-learning, one in autonomous navigation, and one in complex object
Mhm.
recognition. For the past 8 years, 9 years now, I've been at Vici Partners, and I'm the managing partner of the firm.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Okay, well, that is quite a journey, and I'm just a little curious. So I always like to know about people's stories. So tell me about, as you were going on that career journey, what was the biggest setback that you encountered, and how did you overcome it?
Well, my business partner, Tom Janess, and I
Mhm.
in 1996
You're saying that like it's a
started,
long time ago.
yeah, started the world's first e-learning company. And our code is in the Smithsonian as the first e-learning course ever delivered. Uh, it was at Cal State University Hayward in the Bay Area in California. And sort of the biggest setback was A, we didn't patent it, and B, we, we were way too early. We were doing e-learning on dial-up on AOL, which is probably 1,000 times slower than the capacity we have today. And so it was a great idea just way before its time. And obviously, it's something my kids gave me a lot of grief about during the pandemic as they had to take their college or high school courses in an e-learning format.
Oh,
They
that's
cursed their dad for having invented that with his best friend from childhood, Tom.
Well, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Well, okay, so let me just kind of keep going down this rabbit hole. What was the biggest lesson that you learned from that out other than make sure to patent it?
Yeah, that was a obvious one. um, yeah, I think timing of companies is as important as the concept.
Hmm.
And so you have to be sure that the timing of what you're doing is relevant to the current situation. For example, Vici Partners, which focuses just on earnings growth,
Uh-huh.
is extremely popular right now because lots of big publicly traded companies are being asked by their shareholders to focus more on earnings and to focus more on cost reductions. And so we're extremely busy. Now's a great time for Vici Partners.
Yeah.
So timing is really important in companies, and I think that was my big lesson from University Access, which
Mhm.
was the name of the e-learning company long, long ago.
Well, and I think, yeah, in a lot of cases, it's the lessons you really learn are the ones that you get hit on the head with. At least I know that's how I that's how I tend to learn things.
Definitely, I'm a much better executive today, having made many mistakes along the way.
Well, let's actually kind of go into that. So the topic of today's conversation is how to increase your business profits by 25 to 100%. You're very clearly a good person to talk to about this because that's what you do. So share with us, what are some of what's the framework or methodology you go about for achieving that result?
So we have two frameworks that we use.
Hmm.
The first is that the answer almost always lies inside of the company already. So,
So unpack that for me a little bit.
yeah, let's say you're a billion-dollar healthcare distributor.
Hmm.
Um, if you go and talk to the guys in the warehouse and say, so if you owned the company, what would you do differently to simplify operations or improve the customer experience? They're going to have 5 ideas. And then you go to the sales guy and you ask the same question. You go onto the customer care floor and you ask them the same question. And pretty soon you've got literally hundreds of ideas for how to make the company better. And these are ideas from the people who are closest to the company, right? They work there,
Yeah.
they know the products, they know the customers. And so they are really the best people to know. And so at Vici Partners, one of the first things that we do is we go in and look, listen, and feel, and gather hundreds of ideas from the company. And if there's an area, like let's take call centers, if there's no first call resolution being done in a call center, we know that first call resolution drives customer satisfaction. Over time, it drives costs down. And so if there's an area where they aren't doing anything, we'll bring our playbooks from working with lots and lots of companies on how to do first call resolution better and help them come up with a way of implementing that at their company. But 75% plus of the ideas for improving profitability live inside of your company, but they haven't been given voice. And the reason they haven't been given voice is that most often the frontline people don't know how to talk to the executives, and the executives have not historically gotten a lot of value of listening to frontline people. So we teach the frontline folks to talk in a way that an executive can make a decision. What's your idea? How are you going to change it? How does it save costs or improve revenue? How long does it take you to do it? What are the risks? Who else in the organization has already signed off on this, right? And if you package up an idea like that for a CFO or CEO, they can make a decision in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, I get the ROI. I understand how you've mitigated that risk. Doesn't seem that long until payback. And you've talked to the 3 people that I would have talked to. You've already talked to them, and this is what they said. Okay, let's go forward with it, right? So part of what we do is giving the frontline voice and teaching them to use their voice in a way that the executives can actually decide on the ideas. So that's one sort of secret sauce for our consulting at Vici Partners. And the second is that we put consulting in a formula. Q times B equals V. The quality of the idea or the initiatives times the buy-in for the initiative equals the value that initiative is going to generate during implementation. And most consulting firms spend all their time on the Q. How smart can I be on this idea, and how fancy is my deck? We do make sure that the ideas are good, and we spend at least half the time on the project on the buy-in side.
Well, and the buy-in is really important, because it's not just the executive buy-in, which is important, but it's also the buy-in of the people who are going to be implementing.
Totally. And if let's go back to the call center. Let's say you're implementing a first call resolution, which just means that when the call comes in, the call center tries to answer the question fully for the customer on the first call instead of transferring them, right? So, you're going to have to change your systems. You're probably going to have to change how you train the call center people. They're going to need to be more cross-trained so that they can answer more things at the same time. You're going to need to have like a subject matter expert group inside of the call center that you can put the customer on hold and go to the super expert and ask her the question. And the manager of the call center is going to have to buy into that. The people who are now being asked to do more are going to have to be excited about that. The guys who are implementing the system changes have to be able to commit to do that within the time that you need. And so executive buy-in is important. Executive buy-in is kind of the easy part. It's the mid-level managers and the people, like you said, Doug, who are actually going to do the work, who you have to get bought into the initiative.
Yes. Yeah. And because one of the things, at least that I experienced during my corporate career, was that I think that there can be a really easy tendency for a lot of people at the executive level to kind of get their messaging all over the place. And so then it's hard for the people who are executing to really know what the priority is, because I can't tell you the amount of times where I've been in sessions where there will be, I'll hear something like, okay, well, strategy is really important, but we can't miss any operational deliverables, or we have, say like 10 top priorities or something like that. And, the problem is that when you do something like that, nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. conflicting messages.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, I think that's, I mean, I really like that idea that the secret to increasing your profitability really is already inside your company. And so, I mean, have you found that's almost exclusively the case, or have you found that there are some other situations that that tend to bear fruit as well?
Well, if it's a hardcore turnaround where the
Yeah.
company's going to go out of business in 3 to 6 months or is losing a very large amount of money, then some top-down initiatives are required. That usually the
Yeah.
frontline troops aren't going to come up with those. So, you know, freezing hiring, reductions in
Hmm.
force, getting rid of bonuses, renegotiating all the top vendor contracts. I mean, those are turnaround playbook items that traditionally come from the outside. But even in a turnaround, we usually do two stages. We do
Hmm.
sort of a top down, let's get it profitable very quickly. And then afterwards, once it's sort of steady, let's go back in and let's talk to frontline people and let's get them to be involved in the little changes that
Yeah.
can really improve operating income over time.
Yeah.
But in a
Well, and
turnaround, you got to do the big things right away, and then once it's stable, you can come back in and do the smaller items.
got it. Well, let's dig into that, that process of talking to your internal people. How do you normally go about doing that? Because I think that to me feels like, that's the thing that pretty much any company that has more than one person involved in it, can implement this type of framework in order to increase their profitability.
Well, the first rule is amnesty. So,
Hmm.
so the people in the company have to feel like they're not going to be penalized for coming up with something, right? You don't want the CFO jumping out of his chair and say, "What the hell? I thought you were doing that already. What's going on? You
Hmm.
should have been doing that." Once you say something like that, nobody will ever bring anything else up in the company. So true amnesty, where the executives are actually signaling and saying, "I hope you come up with some really dumb stuff that we're doing,
Yeah.
because that's the kind of stuff we can move on right away and stop doing." So, amnesty is really important. I remember working at a large insurance company, and we Vici partners were doing a project, and there was a guy in the mailroom, and during a brainstorming session, he said, "I think we're sending out a lot more mail than we used to." And I said to him, "Well, how much mail are you sending out?" And he said, "I don't know. There are like 30 mailing and printing centers across the whole company." I said, "Well, let's go figure it out." And it turned out that this company was spending $250 million a year on mail. This is in the age of the internet, where I personally would rather get the PDF in the email than, have to go down to my post office box and pull out the big, the big document. So,
Well, and again, don't disclose any confidential information, but that you just told me it's somewhere in financial services, because I can't possibly imagine anybody else who would have any
you are
business reason
you
to
are
send out that
correct.
much mail.
You are correct. And, and so $250 million is a lot of
That's a
money
lot
to
of
be
money.
spending on mail, and it's a material portion of the company's overall earnings. And so, another thing about change is you can't go for the whole enchilada at once. Usually,
Hmm.
you have to start small. So we started small with $9.5 million that they were FedExing to themselves at other offices every year. And,
Yeah.
so actually that was hard to get out because the general counsel was requiring certain post a contractor being terminated, certain documents to be sent via FedEx. And the chief human resource officer, she liked to promote the latest offerings to the employees
Hmm.
with FedEx so that they would open it on their
Yeah.
desk or open it at home. And these are powerful people, and they had the budget. So they didn't want to change. So we had to show them a better path. So
Hmm.
for HR, if you could do it online and people could actually sign up while they're looking at the new HR benefit.
Yeah.
That was better for her than getting a document, and
Yeah.
then maybe they would go online and sign up. But if you actually deliver them the benefit interactively online and allow them to just hit click to sign up, guess what? Her enrollment was much higher. And for the
Yeah.
general counsel, the reason he was requiring all these FedEx documents is because he needed to be sure that the final paperwork got to the contractor after they were terminated. And once we developed a daily update to the contractor's emails, the contractor's phone numbers, and the contractor's home address, he would try those things first. And only if he wasn't successful in reaching the contractor in those ways would he then FedEx something.
Uh-huh.
And so cost went way down in FedEx. But think of yourself as the guy in the mailroom, in a sense, having to go up against the general counsel, head of HR. You're never going to win that. But we, as an outsider who make it a fact-based instead of an emotional or political discussion, it's like, look, we can save you $9.5 million. Here's how. Here's some things you need to do. Are you willing to try? And if necessary, get the CFO involved as a tiebreaker, because he wants the $9.5 million to hit earnings.
Sure. Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's an awful lot on the building consensus side, right? The ideas seem pretty easy, but getting it actually done and agreed to and the behaviors changed, that's the hard part.
Yeah, precisely. Well, because the thing that this really makes me think of is, so, I'm a big nerd on theory of constraints with Dr. Eli Goldratt. And it's, if you think about, say from at the very beginning, when you do business development for sales, going all the way back through operations and fulfillment, if you think of that as a big, long dependent chain, right? What you would say is, you'd say, okay, all of these chains links are dependent on one another. And the way that traditional organizations work is that every chain looks after their own, every link looks at, link department looks after themselves. And every department gets evaluated based on how strong their individual department is. But what you really need to be looking at is the whole chain, and basically focusing all your effort on the one weak link that's the weakest, because that's what's going to limit your overall throughput.
Totally.
And I mean, and so for example, this $9.5 million that you say that you found for them, I am certain that there is probably a place where it could be reinvested, that would probably, produce tremendous results, because again, that one weakest link, any system is always limited by whatever its weakest link is, whatever it's the stop point, slowest point, or whatever for throughput. And a lot of it comes down to figuring out what that is and then addressing it.
Absolutely. And that's why when we work at companies, we only work across the whole company.
Yes.
Or if it's a very large company and they have a $5 billion division, we might work in just that division. But you want to work in the whole system, because usually the optimization, there are some optimizations within the silos, definitely. But the biggest optimizations are across the silos.
Yes.
Right? So in that example of the mailroom, there's the mailroom budget, there's the general counsel's office, there's the HR office, and everybody was kind of playing in their own rules, right? The mailroom guy was printing the stuff and mailing it out. That was his job. The general counsel had budget for mailing stuff. He was doing that. The head of HR, she had budget. She was doing fine. But it's only when you put the three together and you kind of realize, if you look at the corporate view, those silos are not behaving in the best way for the corporation.
Well, and particularly because, according to since my background was in finance, so according to your traditional finance metrics, what you would do is you'd say, you look at your printing and you say, okay, your cost per page is, I don't know, let's say 4.235 cents. And you would try to figure out how you could adjust capital or utilization or whatever to get it to 4.216 cents, right? Some small savings, you say, well, yes, when you multiply it by the volume of pages, that's very significant. Whereas when you look at go across silos, that's where you'd say, oh, by the way, 2/3 of this print is unnecessary.
Right.
So,
Why are we publishing that?
yes, yeah,
Or
exactly.
why are we printing it at all? Right.
Yes, yeah, precisely. Yes, the if you can figure out a way to have to go from a cost to no cost, there is no way that you can out negotiate that. It's like I think one of the things I like the most that I heard about marketing is, the best way to save money on marketing is to be extremely stringent in your list selection so that you are only marketing to the people who are most likely to respond. Because marketing, especially, you tend to pay for a lot of impressions that are people that would have no interest at all in, or not qualified in any way.
If you built condos on a ski slope, hand out flyers to the people who are in line on the chairlift. They're the
Yes,
most likely customers, right?
correct.
Don't
Correct.
buy all of the, Nevada as on Google AdWords, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna miss a lot of the most likely customers.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, let's see. So, okay, you've told us about your mailroom examples. Are there any other examples that are coming to mind as far as, examples of, how you were able to, achieve some of these really significant profitability boosts, based on your framework of, of internal ideas?
So another one in a healthcare company was they did testing for tobacco use
Hmm.
in customers who were applying for life insurance.
Okay.
And the way they used to do it is, you and I would send in the blood sample, and they would test every sample.
Hmm.
And there was a person, again, in the lab who had come from another company. And she said, well, I have a better way of doing it. Let's take the test tubes. Let's empty half of the blood from a batch of 50 into a vat, and let's test the whole vat for tobacco. And if there's no tobacco trace in that whole vat, the 50 people pass the test. If there is a trace of tobacco, then we go back in and do 50 tests. But they reduced their, in that, if it's,
Yeah.
they reduced it potentially by 50. Now, of course, some people do smoke and are lying about it, right? So you are still, in some cases, testing that batch because you found a trace. But in most cases, you're just testing the batch of 50. You're not
Hmm.
testing each of the 50 samples. And that saved them, 80% on their testing costs. And that, again, that came from inside. And, I remember her saying to one of our partners, I know I've been saying this for like 5 years. Right. And the reason is that she didn't have the
Hmm.
voice, and she didn't have a way to tell the story, or her manager didn't want to hear it because that would make him look bad.
Yeah.
But we got it up to the CFO, and it saved a couple $1 million, and the CFO just loved the idea. Right.
Well, and
So it's about,
keep
it's
going.
about helping her craft the
Yeah.
story and getting her to the right person who can listen and who will make a rational decision about it.
Hmm.
Right. And that
Well,
goes to the CFO.
and I think I'd like to go down this rabbit hole a little further, because I think this is a really big part of kind of continued operational and financial improvement for a lot of companies, is to figure out, how do you make it so that people who are on the front lines can elevate their ideas to the decision makers? Because, I mean, of course, I've seen it at the companies where I've worked. I'm sure you see it in your work all the time, which is that there's this wall, or there's this barrier that prevents people who have very legitimate improvement ideas from ever really getting a chance to air those out.
Yeah, the way our philosophy is you build that new cultural trait by
Hmm.
actually doing a project, right? So in doing a project at a company, we talk to thousands of people and generate thousands of ideas and implement maybe 5 or 10% of all the ideas that are
Uh-huh.
raised, because most
Yeah.
ideas are not ROI positive, or there's too much risk. But there is a really
Hmm.
good kernel of ideas that can be successfully implemented. And so what what you're doing is you're actually teaching the organization how to do that by doing it. You're not talking about it, you're doing it. You're brainstorming the ideas, you're building the business cases, you're creating a forum for the people who came up with the idea to talk to the executives and get those ideas greenlit. And so, when the guy in the mailroom, rides up with the CFO is like, "Hey, you're the guy who found me $9.5 million bucks." That's, and so the next time the guy in the mailroom has an idea, he's going to know how to position it, and he's going to, feel better about doing so. And it really comes from the top. The best CEOs don't isolate themselves. They insert themselves in the middle of the company, or if you're a big tech company, go sit in the middle of the developers for half the day every day and just be there and be accessible and be available. It doesn't mean you don't have confidential things that you have to do on your own that are done in the conference room, but you're showing people that you're open to listening, and then you're teaching them how to talk to you in a way that you can make a decision.
Yeah.
What we found at Vici Partners is the most important determinant of how good a company is how well it makes decisions. It's not strategy. It's not, who are the competitors. It's not, even though I love Peter Senge, it's not how quickly an organization learns. It's how it makes decisions. And we can tell in an instant what kind of decision culture is there. And there's a strong correlation between decision culture and opportunity. If you're a kingdom where one person makes a decision and everything has to filter up to him or her, and it's decided based upon that own person's personal preference, there's going to be a massive amount of opportunity at that company, because that means that there have been thousands of ideas that have been buried, because there's no way they can all get up to the top, right?
Now, but of course, the critical part there is getting that one person to decide to change things so that those ideas can be implemented.
And that's very hard.
Yes, that is very hard.
And for example, we at Vici Partners, we won't take on a project if we think that's unchangeable, right? The king has to be comfortable delegating a lot of the analysis of the ideas and building of buy-in for the ideas to his lieutenants. And of course, he can sign off on the final 100 that are going to get implemented, but he has to be comfortable with dispersing some of his power to look for the best things and dispersing some of his power to cut things out.
No, completely. Well, okay. So, and kind of keeping in this same line of conversation, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you've seen, around kind of this, elevating internal ideas and being able to, to drive significant profitability increases? What are some of the, what are some of the kind of mental turns that people really need to make in order to, or that, that people don't always quite intuitively understand?
Let's just go back to that formula, Q times B equals V.
So
a lot of idea programs, many big companies have them. You've got an email box where you can send in an idea, or you've got a phone number you can call in. However good the idea is, unless buy-in is built around it, it's never going to get anywhere. And so we say, ideas are the easy part. There are lots and lots of ideas. How do you build a business case that's compelling around it, and then get the people who have to sign off on it, the people who have to implement it, and the people who have to live it to be bought into it? It's that buy-in for it that's so important. And our firm focuses heavily on that.
The buy-in. Got it. That completely makes sense. All right. Well, let me ask, is there a question that I should have asked but didn't?
Well, one that's always interesting is that people ask is there generally more opportunity at small companies or at big companies? And, You would think there would be less opportunity at smaller companies, like a $250 million company,
Yeah.
because at a company that size, the CEO and the CFO, they really understand the business because they're much, much closer to it.
Yeah.
But they also try and run things more through them. And so they're a little bit more controlling than
Hmm.
oftentimes at big companies. So there's opportunity because employees are, mom and dad are taking care of them, right? The CEO and CFO are making most of the decisions. And so they tend to be more silent, or they tend to withhold their ideas. So that creates opportunity at small companies. And big companies, you would also, big companies tend to have, especially the Fortune 200 companies, the top executive teams are incredibly qualified, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they're all gunning to be the next CEO, which is a $10 million a year job. And they're very, they're usually very good. And so
Mhm.
you would expect that, that because of that, there might not be a lot of opportunity. But the problem with big companies is that people don't spend enough time at the front lines, right?
Yeah.
So if you run a $5 billion warehouse system, have you done the job of the night shipping guy? Did you do that in the past year? Have you ridden around in a truck? Have you worked in the repair shop for 6 hours? Like, the bigger companies, the executives tend to spend a lot of time managing their peers and managing up instead of understanding the business at the coal face, right? Like the
Mhm.
miner in the coal mine, right at the coal face.
Yeah.
And great executives are at the coal face a fair amount.
Well, and that one of the ideas that, or the thoughts that triggered, that I'd love to get your input on. So my observation, just in my own corporate career, and observing other people too, is that the way that most career paths go is that you start up ascending in your career based on developing the ability to do a job or variety of jobs well. So I came up in finance, and so it's about being able to do things like cost and inventory, pricing, monthly close, getting really good at Excel, knowing data systems, etc. But at some point that shifts to where your ability to continue ascending depends on where you are in the rank group of other people who are at that same level. So then at that point, at least just my observation is, a lot of people's focus shifts from from their operational quality and execution to optimizing where they stand on the internal pecking order. And I think, I know that if you have highly ethical people, that can be counteracted. But I think that, just my observation is that I think that makes it really hard for larger companies to be highly effective, just because there's so much career ascent distraction amongst the people who are in the management tiers. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but that's just been my observation.
Oh yeah, organizations are very political, right? And the farther up the ladder you get, oftentimes the more time you spend on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think the best thing is to do your job well, to serve your peers well, to be collaborative, to always put the customer first, to pay attention to costs. You keep doing those things and you're going to rise up in the ranks.
Yeah.
And if the company doesn't promote you, then you can go somewhere else and rise up in those ranks. I do think, going back to your progression of careers, that what it takes to be successful at different stages is very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started out on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs, and it was, how good was I with the HP 12C and the spreadsheet, and could I crank out the merger valuation ranges, and could I give the
Mm-hmm.
information to the vice president and partners that they needed to be able to
Uh-huh.
talk to the client, right? Those are very tactical things.
Yeah.
As you get higher up, it's, can you manage people? Can you
Yeah.
sell? Can you collaborate with your peers? Can you instead of just taking the task on, can you think about whether the task should be done, or
Yeah.
whether a different task should be done? And so, and then over time, can you, as a leader of a company, are people willing to follow you? Right. That's the definition of leadership. Are people willing to
Yes.
follow you? And, how do you set a path forward that they've bought into, that they've helped co-create with you?
Hmm.
Um, that's the great skill of the great CEOs.
Got it. Got it. No, that completely makes sense. All right. So Alec, it's been a lot of fun. I guess one of the things I like to do at the very end of my conversations is ask, do you have any questions for me? I've been grilling you for the last half hour. Do you? Is there anything that you'd like to know about from my end?
Well, I'd be interested in what you think is important to corporations in America and across the globe at this moment.
Hmm.
What are the trends that you're seeing as interesting topics for people, and how's that changed over the past 5 years?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. I'll take a swing at this one. The thing that I think, so when I think kind of America globally, I know there's a tendency to want to try to talk about, okay, how do you outcompete, whoever for a while it was China. Soon it's, now India is coming up, and there's always going to be somebody who you're trying to outcompete. But one of the things that I heard very early in my career that really stuck with me is that, whenever we're talking about kind of being head-to-head competition with, with overseas competitors, right? You have to understand that typically your labor rates are less than half of what it costs for US labor. And a lot of those people will work 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. So the only way is you need to have better ideas that are better executed with better business models. Which means you need to float ideas up to the top. You need to be willing to fail, and you need to have your organization as flat and apolitical as possible. And
Hmm.
the other thing that I would say too is that there's this belief that like strategy is one part of the company and operations is another, and that they're not necessarily, and that somehow they're separate. And in my view, they're not. Your strategy and your execution has to be the same thing. Otherwise you're going to have operational people who are basically continuing to go forward even though the market's shifted, or you'll be committing to a strategy that's completely unexecutable. I
Hmm.
mean, I think, if I'm, without more than 10 seconds to think about it, those are the those are the thoughts that come off the top of my head.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. All right. Well, hey, Alec, I really, really appreciate your time.
Nice to talk to you, Doug.
Yeah.
Enjoyed being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.